and I'll be your moderator for this session. I trust we're all doing great. If you can hear me, can you hear me? Okay, fantastic. Okay. We appreciate the privilege of joining us for this knowledge sharing session on auditing cloud infrastructure. Like we shared in the introductory message, several institutions around the world are seeing the value in cloud computing and they are migrating their on-premise workload to the cloud. Now, this presents a fresh demand on we tech risk practitioners to provide reasonable assurance and advisory on the safety of these workloads. The success of any audit engagement, so be it cloud, whatever it is hinged on the effectiveness of our planning. I had shared earlier this month on LinkedIn some of the things to take into consideration when planning for a cloud audit. I'll share that in that link to that article in the chat box in a bit for some of us that may not have read it, so that you can read at your spare time. So in the course of our session, we'll just gloss over that part, because of time. We recognize that 1 hour may not be enough to do justice to the topic, but let's see how much we can squeeze within the limited time. So please, if you have any questions, just post them in the chat and we will, as much as possible, provide answers to them at the end of this session. Our faculty this morning is Mr. Ganiyu Sanusi. He is a Microsoft Azure architect and administrator. He's also a Microsoft certified solution expert. He is a CISA and a CCNP, among several other certifications that he possesses. He works with as an IT auditor with one of the tier 1 banks in Nigeria. I dare say that we are in good hands for the next 45 minutes. So Ganiyu, over to you if you can hear me.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for this honor to be in the face of our honored colleague to have this session with us, and I really appreciate it. So we'll be starting off with the introduction to auditing cloud infrastructure. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you. So what is cloud computing? Naturally, when we heard of the word cloud computing, it's basically an avenue of where cloud infrastructures are delivered over the internet, which simply means our cloud infrastructure is conventionally not in the 4 walls of our environment. It's not in brick and mortar. It's somewhere over there in the cloud. That is the basic thing. And just in the same vein, we are seeing it as when we are online, it's just that these things are not with us, but it is just somewhere else. And naturally, the drive and the curve for cloud at the initial was centered around cost saving. But as time goes on, several benefits were derived from it. Things like rapid elasticity, that's the rate at which we spend resource, measured service, pay as you go, broad network accesses, on-demand access, just to mention of a few. Those are several benefits derived from the cloud infrastructure. Now, every cloud infrastructure actually comes in 3 models, and the models are pretty straightforward. The name speaks to them. The first one is the infrastructure as a service. So basically in infrastructure as a service, what we're saying is an organization or a customer is subscribing to an infrastructure on the cloud platform. When I mean infrastructure, things we have on our LAN currently, things like server, network, storages, these are what we refer to as infrastructure. So if I'm subscribing to an infrastructure as a service, it means on cloud, I'm having all this infrastructure somewhere stored on cloud. The second model is the platform as a service. So in platform as a service, the cloud vendor is saying, I have the platform, I have the infrastructure. Just bring your platform and leverage on my infrastructure. So it means as a customer, I'm not bothering myself on things around physical server or operating systems. All I'm being told is, I have the operating system, I have the server, just bring your platform and roll up with what I have on ground. Then the third one is a software as a service. So in software as a service is much of an hotel facility. So the cloud service provider is telling you, I have the hardware, I have the platform, I have this. So I just come and enjoy part of the software I'm leveraging. Something like a O365 or cloud, CRM cloud. These are infrastructures and platforms that the cloud service provider already have in place. So you as a customer, if you are subscribing to a software as a service, you just come in as a tenant in that platform and a portion of it is allotted to you. So we have several cloud service providers, and the notable ones are Microsoft and Amazon Web Service, that is AWS. So when we look at this Gartner chart, over the world, Amazon is seen as a leader in terms of providing cloud service. And we are seeing also Microsoft is also somewhere very close to the top. And this is on the world, world stage. When it comes to this part of the world, in Africa and in Europe, Microsoft is actually a force to reckon with, and they are doing well. And again, there are similarities with all these service providers. What is obtainable in A is obtainable in B. Just like you comparing a Camry 2020 and a Honda 2020. Aside from the name and the brand, the flavor and the core are almost the same thing. So what is available on Microsoft is also available in also all the service provider. So from this stage, we will be dwelling into planning and scoping the definition when you are auditing cloud environment. So just gloss over this, like the facilitator already mentioned. A link will be shared with us so that we can read further on this. So we have things around, when planning for your cloud engagement, you need to understand things around your cloud strategy, your cloud models, the regulatory that affects the industry you play in, and also the subscribed services or the services your organization is subscribing for from these service providers. From the link, I think we'll be able to get more detailed information on this. So we dovetail into Microsoft as a cloud service provider. Like I explained earlier, every resources we have on the, every infrastructure or resource we have on the cloud is termed cloud service. So irrespective of what we are saying, or what we are subscribing for, be it infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, that particular service is called a cloud service. For example, on infrastructure as a service, the basic things we are having here are compute. When you hear the word compute, it speaks to things around servers, server resources, CPUs, memories, and co. Then we have also the storage. When we have the storage services, basically are into four. We have the disk, we have the files, we have the queue, and we have the blob. So what Microsoft did was to narrow it down to the different type of things that needs to be stored. For example, when you are storing a non-structured data, something like video streaming and co, you make use of your blob storage to do that. And you make use of your disk as the hard disk to your virtual server and files to your conventional files. Then we have things like networking. Traditionally, in the on the on-prem, you'll be seeing things like your router, switches, and firewalls. But when it comes to Azure, you'll be seeing things like your VNet, that's the virtual network. You'll be seeing things like your network security groups, firewalls, load balancers. These are also different services you can subscribe to when it comes to infrastructure as a service. And these are also synonymous to what we have on-prem in terms of how we use our switches and our routers and firewalls. Then going to platform as a service, like I said earlier, in platform as a service, your cloud service provider is providing you with the hardware and the operating system. All you have to do is to bring your platform and manage it. There are several platforms available. We have things like the Azure SQL. We have things like the DevOps environment. We have analytics and insights. We have machine learning. So several of them. For you to have subscribed to this, you must have a justification and have a strategy around it. So before we also move forward, we heard the word cloud. cloud. And as an auditor, when we are reviewing our on-prem, I'll always be interested. Where is my device? Can I see the machine? I'll be interested in the physical security. So we should also be aware when it comes to Azure resource, any resource we are subscribing to, somewhere along the globe, there is a bare metal. When I say bare metal, I mean the servers that support this architecture. And the way it works is we interface as a cloud customer, you interface with your resource through the Azure portal. On top of the Azure portal, we have an API which connects to the orchestrator. The orchestrator is like the control unit for the Azure service. And this orchestrator lies on the fabrics. The fabrics are actually the core servers. So Azure currently has close to 20 data centers across the region, across 20 data centers in 20 regions across the world. So it means we have, Microsoft has 20 data centers all over the world. And these data centers are heavy. So you also have that privilege when you are creating your resource, you choose the desired location where your resources will be saved. And like I mentioned earlier, regulation and compliance, data residency, these are all these things you also consider when you are choosing where your data resides. And in this vein also, we quickly run a comparison of responsibility on all these models. We have the on-prem, we have the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. I quickly like comparing this with housing accommodation. We have different types of accommodation. You have short-let hotels. You can rent your apartment, and you can buy your apartment and can buy a whole building. So the responsibility a customer has over the platform you are subscribing to is similar to your responsibility over the housing scheme you are subscribing to. For example, I lodged in an hotel for 2 days. As a customer, I won't be bothered with painting the house. I won't be bothered with bringing in furniture. The hotel facility or management will have prepared that for me. But if I'm renting an apartment, then I'll be interested in painting and co. So also is the responsibility for the models. If you are having an on-prem, all the responsibility from the physical network, physical machines, application, everything is being managed by you as a customer. But if you are going for infrastructure as a service, what Microsoft does is they provide you the data center, network, and the physical host. But from the operating system layer upward, it is the sole responsibility of the customer. Why am I saying this? If I'm subscribing for infrastructure as a service and there is a vulnerability on my operating system, 100% that liability is on me. But looking at the next model, which is the platform as a service, we can see Microsoft is responsible, apart from the physical devices, the operating system is the sole responsibility of Microsoft. Then you as a customer, your responsibility from the network and application and identity management also is a shared responsibility between you and Microsoft. But from account access, client, and governance, all those things belongs to you. In vain with software as a service as well, you can see the responsibility matrix. What we are saying is the model you are subscribing to will also flow into your audit program. You should know the risk you've transferred to Microsoft. You should know the risk you are responsible for, and you should also build your checklist around these things. I think we are clear on that. So the next thing is now dovetailing into the areas we'll be covering in this session. So we'll be covering 5 areas. The first one is identity and access management. The next one is the network security, Azure resources, logging and monitoring. Then we'll talk of the security center. So like my mentor will always tell me, when it comes to an infrastructure, the crown jewel of that infrastructure is the access management. If as an auditor or as an organization, you can clean up your access management, you are 90% safe. And when we talk of access management, it talks about authentication and authorization. How do we mean by authentication? Authentication is the process of identifying a user to be whom he or she claimed to be. So how do we identify users? And authorization is the roles or the privileges or the rights you are granting to such user after authentication. So identity and access management is very key, is a crown jewel of an organization. And most compromise always comes from this area. So as an auditor, we must be very careful and have our eyes fixed on access management, because there is nothing you actually do on Azure or on cloud that does not dovetail into this access management. So in the course of we as an auditor reviewing access management, the first thing we always want to do as an auditor is a control environment. An organization is as strong as your control environment. If you have no control environment, you are gone. So in the basic tool, the basic document we look at in our control environment for access management is the access control matrix. So what access control matrix does is a document that has been prepared by an organization based on your risk appetite. It defines the rights and roles each type of user or each class of user should have access to. So invariably, it's like a global catalog that tells you how users are to be profiled, roles that should be assigned to users based on their job function. And this dovetails into the privilege of need to know and need to have. So this is our Bible, this is our baseline for review. Then we look at security around access management. We look at multi-factor authentication. What type of authentication do we have? What category of users are these things enforced on? And what our policy is saying and what our best practice is saying. And also you must also be able to verify and validate if the presence or absence of unauthorized users on the environment. How do we mean by unauthorized users? We have expert staff, we have guest users, and we have vendors. So there's also a concept in Azure we will speak to when it comes to external identity. So as an auditor, what you do naturally, when you log on to your Azure and you go to your user section, be able to see the list of all the users you have on the Azure environment. And you see their status, if they are active or inactive. So what you want to do as an auditor is to spool this user and probably get a baseline documentation, which is from the HCM that shows the list of users available or that are in current employment with the bank, and use that to review. That is one leg. The second one is, even if they are still with the bank, you need to be sure they are having the desired role they are meant to have. They are not having excessive privileges. What they have is what they are expected to have in line with the role, the access control metrics we discussed about. So when you on Azure, you have the privilege of hovering down to users. So when you select a user, you can actually drill down on that user and see things around the user. You can see the last time the user logged on, the date it was created. You can see the groups the user belonged to. You can see the licenses assigned to the users, and you can see the roles assigned to such users. So again, these are from the GUI. There are several scripts you can also run to fetch all these things for you. You can see users and role and export to probably your Excel. So sort things makes it easier for you to review and do your data analysis. So in light of that, the next thing you should also be careful of is around groups. We all know when you are managing users, by best practice, it's not ideal to assign roles and responsibilities to users directly. It makes management rough and not that cool to review. So what you do is you create your group depending on the categories of users you are having. Then you assign the roles and privileges to that group. You can now assign users to that group. With that, it makes it easier. If users are changing role, all you just need to do is move the user from one group to the other, and the user inherits the roles. So as auditors, we must be careful of these groups, and we must review and validate the roles assigned to these groups, because it's just by inheritance. Any user that finds him or herself in this group automatically inherits all the privileges for this group. So we should be on the watch for groups and the roles assigned to the groups. So when talking of roles, there are several roles and privileges that comes inbuilt in Azure. We can always say this when we log on to Azure, we go to the roles, how these roles are defined and what they can do. So we need to review these roles in line with what is assigned to users and what is assigned to groups. We have administrator, we have members, we have ownership. We can go through these at our leisure time. You see the roles and what they can do. So based on this privilege and need to know, these roles should be apportioned to the groups in accordance with what the group does. And again, we can also customize our own roles, and put in the desired privileges so that we can now add to to groups. So in the process of probably having customized roles, you must also be aware and review what rights are assigned to these roles. So I think that is that on roles and users. If we can go through that area and build our checklist, will be good. Then another class of user we should also be wary of is what we call the manager identity. So traditionally, manager identities are like service accounts. Service accounts are accounts that are linked or tied to applications. And in Azure, we have two types of manager identities. We have the system assigned and we have the user assigned. So in system assigned, a manager identity is tied to an application or a service, and the life cycle of that manager identity starts and ends with that service. Once we decommission that service, that manager identity is gone. And the second one is user assigned identity. That is what we usually have traditionally, whereby you create a user on AD, you created the password, and that user is tied to an application. And in that vein, even after the end of life of that application, if you are not careful, you have that user still running and still having this luxury of access. So we need to be very careful when reviewing manager identities. You need to, for example, this is a manager identity that is created. You need to be very sure of the roles and privileges assigned to this manager identity. And when we are saying roles and privileges, we need to be very careful because there are issues that could come up. There was an issue in 2020, we call it Golden Samuel attack on SolarWinds Orion, whereby a service account was assigned an administrative account. And we know, if you are aware of what Samuel does, Samuel Trust is a trust relationship between two entities. And with that, the privileged administrator account from SolarWinds Orion was able to compromise services at over 3,000 clients. And the hackers were able to inject some backdoors along those clients. And the root cause is just about you giving a service account and necessary privilege. And that account was not limited to that particular service it's rendering. So as auditor, we must be very careful as regards to scope and roles for service accounts, whereby every account defined, you must know the limitation, the application it should work on, and also the privileges it has. Then the third thing around identity management that we also need to be very careful of is called external collaboration. In Azure, you can actually invite third party to have access to your environment. Someone with Gmail account, someone in another organization, probably the CBN. So you can actually invite them. So we have a setting called the external collaborator setting. This is it here. And you define rules on who can accept users, who can invite third party, what type of rights the third party has over your organization. So this list of third parties, you also see it in the list of all your active users. So you need to be very careful when you are now seeing someone from another domain having access on your environment. You need to be very careful of them. Why were they invited? What are they doing? Do they need the access? And all these things must be very careful when we are reviewing them. And like I said earlier, access and identity management is the crown jewel of every organization. If you can control this access, I can assure you 90% of your organization or your resources are actually safe. So we should be very careful and pay more attention to it. So the second stage you'll be going to is the network security. So we need to understand the concept of network. When we say network, traditionally, network is a combination or communication between one or two entities to share resource. We use it in sharing resource. And we know traditionally, when we talk of network, think of our switches, which is a layer 2 device for access. We think of our router, which is a layer 3 device for routing. And we talk of probably our firewall, which works on layer 4 to 7 for security. We need to understand how that concept comes in. So in Azure, you won't be seeing router and you won't be seeing switches. What you'll be seeing instead are VNets. So how do these VNets work? In Azure, we have 5 basic types of connectivity. The first one is called the VNet service endpoint. This is a process whereby your VNet is like a VLAN. And I think you understand what a VLAN is. VLAN is like a segment of your network, how you segment your network. So VNet service endpoint is how your VNet communicates with Azure and global services that are available on Azure without going through the internet. Then we have the second one that is called VNet peering. Traditionally, when we create VLANs on probably our switch, each VLAN will be independent of the other VLAN. It means devices on a particular VLAN cannot communicate with devices on another VLAN, except you have a layer 3 device that does the routing. That is a router. You must have a router to route traffic from VLAN 1 to VLAN 2. Otherwise, there won't be any communication with that VLAN. So in Azure, that routing is called VLAN peering. So you need to understand how to peer your VLANs. You need to understand what it takes to peer VLANs, how to peer VLANs, and the rationality for even having VLANs. Then the third and fourth are what we are familiar with. Point to site, whereby you have a workstation or a node somewhere and has a VPN access to your environment. And site to site, whereby 2 different sites. It might be your extension of your branches, or you have a third-party vendor that needs to provide access for you, but need access to your site. Can establish a site-to-site VPN site. But the consequence is that that tunnel is created over the internet, and you have gateways at both sites that create that encrypted tunnel for the 2 sites to communicate. And the last one, which is actually more of the things or the beauty that comes with Azure, is called Azure Express Route. So this is like you extending your local infrastructure to your cloud. So I have a cloud service or cloud infrastructure somewhere in the globe, and I have my head office here in Nigeria, and I want a seamless integration between the services or the infrastructure on my network to the cloud. For example, I have my core banking application on-prem, and I want it to automatically save or synchronize to the cloud. I create this express route, and in express route, it doesn't go through the internet. That's the beauty. It goes through the backbone, and with that, your connectivity is very secure. But again, as an auditor, you must understand the controls and risk around this. You must understand, how do my on-prem communicate with my cloud? What controls am I putting in place? Is it a bastion host or a proxy, whereby for my on-prem to access the cloud, it goes through a proxy or a bastion host? Or probably I'm dedicating a particular VLAN that I'm granting access based on the way my organization works, and I'm creating a tunnel to that cloud. So all in all, there is no hard and fast route to this, but you must understand the concept of the organization, how it works, how the cloud is adapted, and how these settings are put in place. Then you appraise the risk and look at the controls in place. So this is how a typical network environment works. We can see here, VNet A. Looking at the IP address, it's telling you that it's a VLAN. And you can see another VNet is another VLAN. So we have 2 types of peering. We have transit peering and we have peer-to-peer. Naturally, two VNets that are paired can only communicate to each other. But if a VNet is defined as a transit, for example, B naturally should be able to communicate with this VNet. B should be able to communicate with this particular VNet, but should not communicate with A, because there is no direct peering. But if this particular VNet is defined as a transit VNet, because it has a link with A, B will also be able to communicate with this and also A as well. So you must be very careful of all these lacunas so that it doesn't create a vulnerability whereby you just assume VNet A is communicating to VNet B, whereas VNet B has a transit connectivity with C and D, and invariably B has unauthorized access to C and D. So you must be very careful around that. So in the course of reviewing, you must be careful. The first thing as an auditor that you'll be interested in is the topology or the infrastructure diagram. This gives you an idea of how your infrastructure or your LAN is structured, and it gives you the control that should be placed within the LAN and how each LAN communicates with each other. From there, you have an overview of how your cloud is to be structured. And vis-a-vis that, you appraise your cloud infrastructure to be sure it is in conformity with what is expected of the organization. Then you also look at the adequacy of your segmentation. Like I said earlier, we have different regulatory requirements. Naturally, I wouldn't want any Tom, Dick, and Harry to have access to my core banking application. There must be a segment for that. I wouldn't want the DMZ to communicate directly with my application. There must be a segment for that. I wouldn't want my customer to have access to my data center. Sorry, I wouldn't want my customer-facing clients or staff, someone in marketing, to have direct access to my data center, there must be segmentation to that. So you must have an idea of how your organization is structured. Then that's your organization segmentation must be tailored to that, and the controls around what is expected of each of the team should also be put into consideration. Then we have what we call the NSG rules. These are access layer rules that filters what comes and goes from each subnet to the other. And we'll see how that is pictured. Then the next one is your firewall. Someone once asked me, do I need a firewall? And I'll ask you, the next question I'll ask you is, do you have any device or any infrastructure that is facing internet? We all know the world is a global place. There is no way an organization will live in isolation. You surely have one or two things to the general public on internet, and they also need, the customer needs access to you. So in that vein, you definitely need a firewall. And we know firewall operates at the sixth topmost echelon of the OSI model of networking. That's the application, presentation, session, network, transport, and data link. So these firewalls it gives us a granular prevention and security at all these this model. So the next thing we should also need to appraise as an auditor is, how are these firewall placed within my organization? We have internal threats, we have external threats. Firewall is a perimeter device. It doesn't mean I'm preventing people coming from internet. My internal staff are also a threat to me. And mind you, most of the threats that an organization faces also comes from within. So we also need to have a firewall within the organization, especially to prevent our crown jewel. I will expect a firewall between every user LAN and my data center, because it's very critical to me where my resources are saying. My card production environment, in line with PCI requirements, you should have a firewall in between. You must be aware of all these standards and regulatory requirements, and on security and risk assessment. So based on that, we must know how volatile our segments are and what controls do we need to put in place. In line with that, we review how the entire infrastructure is structured. Then we also appraise the connectivity, like I said earlier. Why will a Ghanaian have a VPN access to my entire infrastructure? Is there a business justification for it? Is it just-in-time access? All these things must be appraised, and there must be a reason behind all those access and connectivity. So looking at the next slide, this is how a typical NSG and virtual networks look. When you create a virtual network, it gives you a range of IP address, just like the way it gives you when you are creating your VLAN, which is defined by your block of IP address. This is what a typical VNet looks like. And when you create your VNet, you now need to assign a network security group to that VNet. The network security group is more of an access control list that defines what type of communication is expected or is permitted from this VNet to that VNet. And we'll be very careful. This access control list works on 5 tuple: the source IP address, destination IP address, source port, destination port, and the protocols. So you need to be aware of all these things, and based on your documentation, your infrastructure diagram, and requirement, you should know what is the type of traffic expected from one VNet to the other. And with that, you review your access list. When you are reviewing your access list, what are the things you are interested in seeing? For example, you will be on the watch out for VNets that are permitting access from private IP address. So in this way, I have expected you to know the class of IP address we have, the class A, B, and C private address, and the class of IP address for public IP address. So once you are saying that this VNet is permitting connectivity from this IP address, and this IP address is from internet, it's a public IP address, definitely that device can be reached directly over the internet, and you need to appraise why that is the case. You need to appraise your rules. Are we having obsolete rules? Are we having redundant rules? Are we having contrasting rules? Are we having permissive rules? And based on best practice, for every at the end of every rule, you do an explicit denial so that you only permit the traffic you've created access for. And we see in the course of our engagement, we see so many permissive rules, whereby someone configure rules and I'm saying permit Ganu, permit Tony, then at the end of the day, permit all. That has already negates the beauty of me creating access to Tony and Ganu, because I'm now saying permit everybody. So at the end of your access list, you must have an explicit denial, which is very key, and that is what makes your access list effective. So we should review this and review it thoroughly. Then our firewall as well, we must also scan. And why do we need to scan? Fine, you can review your firewall manually, but with scanning tools, it makes sense and it makes it easier. And why do we need this? Because of vulnerabilities. As an auditor, we are given assurance that our organization is secured. For example, there was a case of Capital One in US, whereby there was a vulnerable rule configured on the firewall, which permits access to web access. And before you know it, over 100 million customers were compromised just because of the vulnerable rule. And as an auditor, you will be asked, was this firewall reviewed? What was the auditor's comment as regards the vulnerable rules? You know, as auditors, when there are no issues, we are safe. But when there are issues, the first thing is, has this environment been reviewed? So when we are reviewing, we need to understand the core things to be reviewed and their implications if we have breaches or we have vulnerabilities. So we must be very careful around rules. In fact, network security is more of rules definition and access list. So we must be on top of our game when it comes to this. So because of time, we'll be going to the next one, which is more of resource and resource groups. So this will be we'll be saying this globally. We won't be delving into it our resource, probably virtual machines, storage, and no. But what we are saying is, in line with what we have presently on-prem, the same exposure, the same vulnerability, the same issue we have with our on-prem resource are still the same exposure we have, what we have on cloud. For example, either I'm having a virtual machine on cloud or I'm having my physical server on-prem. One of the major issues is around access management. Who has access to this resource? From where can this resource be accessed? What type of access do you have? What type of vulnerability am I having on the resource? Am I patching it? Antivirus, is it up to date? My security tools, DLP, encryption. So we just speak generally to all these resources. What should we be on the lookout for when within our resource? And before we could do that, we need to understand the concept of resource and resource management in Azure. The first thing in Azure is a management group. Management group is like our Active Directory, where from that point, you can push policies across several nodes and virtually all your resources. So policies are defined at management group. So as an auditor, you must be able to review what you have on the management group, what policies are enforced at management groups. Because whatever policy you enforce at management group trickles down, it's by inheritance. All the sub-components of the management group inherits all these policies. So you must be very careful and review as appropriate what policies are defined and how they trickle down. The next thing is a subscription. Subscription is just a way of segmenting the resource you are having on cloud. For example, I can have my security department and they have their security tool, and I'm creating a subscription whereby all their security tools will be in that bucket. I have IT and they have servers and storage. I'm creating a subscription for them and their resources are there. And one other thing, or one other good use of subscription is used for billing. So you can be able to track who is consuming more. So if Microsoft is telling me, guys, you've used $1 billion for the month, you'll be able to know which resource or which unit is using more, and if there's any justification for that cost consumption. And under each subscription, you can now see your resource group. Resource group is a way of grouping your resource. For example, as an IT person, I'll be interested in grouping my application servers together, my DB servers, I'll be able to group them together, my DMZ, I'll be able to group them together. So in this case, it's easier for me to implement my tier approach. If I'm implementing a 2-tier approach to my infrastructure, a 3-tier approach. So all these things makes it come handy. And at the lower echelon is the resource. These are the actual resources we are managing. And what are we checking? Like I said earlier, we'll be interested in checking the user access management and identity management. Parameterization comes in handy here. I will expect an organization must have a baseline configuration standard or admin standard, which tells you for every server I'm spinning up, it must have X, Y, and Z configuration, must be joined to the domain, password complexity must be enforced, DLP must be enforced, patches must be up to date. All these things are baseline. And as an auditor, we're not just auditing from the top of our head. we are giving assurance in line with what the organization has set. So these are what we use as baseline for the review. Also, in line with what we have presently, we look at antivirus, patching, and vulnerability management. Another key thing is the encryption. And when we are talking about encryption, look at data at rest and data in transit. My VHDs, how am I encrypting them? So if someone was able to even hijack probably my storage, what can the person see? I should have put in encryption. If someone was able to sniff through my network, I should have encrypted my traffic. All these things needs to be checked as an auditor. Then look at backup. How am I backing up my data? Where am I backing it up? How am I synchronizing it? Then look at also resource utilization. And one of the beauty, it's a beauty and it's a cost in Azure. Azure is a pay-as-you-go service. And in the course of our audit engagement, you've seen teams spinning off several resources that are not even needed. And in the course you have, and it's not even if you are spinning off a test environment, it comes at a cost. So you must be very careful as regards how you are utilizing your resource. Every resource you have on the environment must have a justification and a business reason for you having it there. If you are not doing that, you are just accruing unnecessary costs for your organization, right? So you also have instances whereby you have over-provisioned server. I have a time server, for example, which only needs probably 2 gig RAM, and someone spins up a server with 10 gig RAM, and you get, so at the end of the day, you are paying more for less. When naturally, Azure is meant to even save you costs, and if you are not careful, you end up saving more. And this comes in handy when you are doing ROI review for IT, and that's the return on IT investment. For every investment, we must have a reasonable cost and cost optimization for it. Then we also have, as an organization, you have your in-house tools or in-house compensation controls that you've deployed. For example, I'm saying my organization, I must have DLP, I must have anti-malware. All these things that you have on-prem, you must ensure they are also available and they are implemented on your cloud resource. And also another thing is the key vault management. In Azure, key vault is used, is like a safe where you keep your encryption key and other sensitive identity management. So you'll be interested in who has access to this. And what was the consequence? If someone could be able to hijack your encryption keys, then you are a goner. So Azure Vault is very key. Access to it, rights to it, and controls over it is very key. You will be interested in knowing who has access. Can it be deleted? Can it be retrieved? We have port protection, port deletion, all these things. You need to over them and be sure it's as safe as possible because it's one of your crown jewel. And another thing is monitoring. How and where are we monitoring? Paying logs have been enabled. Do we have someone reviewing the logs? Because as much logs as you have, as long as the logs are not reviewed, is as good as having nothing. So when you have all these things in place and you have a checklist built around it, you can be rest assured and create assurance around the management and optimization of your resource on cloud. So the next thing we will talk about now is this is a quick win for us as an auditor. So in Azure, we have what we call the Azure Defender. So what the Defender does is it gives you the security posture. It's like a one-stop shop for a security posture. So even if you're not technical, from there, you can actually have an overview of what is happening in your entire cloud infrastructure. And it comes in threefold. We have the continuous access, we have the secure, and we have the defend. So all in all, what these three folds is that it gives you a secure score. What do I mean by secure score? It appraises your security posture, and based on the vulnerability that have been flagged, it gives you a score rating. For example, I have patches not enabled on 5 of my 10 virtual machines. So you are already on 0.5 in terms of, you're already on 50% compliance in terms of patch management. It tells you I have 20 global administrators and only one had MFA. In that vein, you know what you are scoring in terms of implementation of multi-factor authentication. So it gives you a score or a rating as regards your entire security posture. And it also gives you vulnerability assessment. This is like a scanning. It scans your entire network and tells you where you have vulnerable resources and type of vulnerability that exists on these resources. And the third thing it gives you is the asset inventory. Like I said earlier, Azure is pay as you go. So you must have an overview of the assets you are having, and there must be a reason or justification behind all these access. Without that, you just be incurring unnecessary cost. Then we have a section called regulatory compliance. This is a smart win for audits. And audit is going towards agile auditing. So as a smart auditor, what I will just do is define a compliance. We have some inbuilt compliance like the PCI DSS, the NIST, and CIS benchmark that comes inbuilt with Azure. But as an auditor, you can also do a customized and regulatory compliance, whereby you define your checklist and you run a scan with the checklist. So based on your checklist, it scans your system and gives you what are going on wrong based on what you've defined. So that is also a very, it's a quick win for us as an auditor. Then the next thing is the security recommendation. So aside from just flagging issues, it tells you what the risk are as regards to what was being flagged and advise you, like an advisory, gives you a recommendation of what you should do as an auditor that mitigates those vulnerabilities. Then we have what we call just-in-time access. This is very good for vendor management. So I should naturally not be giving my vendors a lifelong access. It should be based on need and time bound. Then we also have the adaptive and network admin. This scans our network based on our admin standard we've defined. And the adaptive means it's reactive. It's like real-time online scans. Then we also have security alerts. This is just what we have on our security solution, whereby when there are issues, depending on type of issues or risk you are looking at, it notifies a class or a category of people so that it can easily be remediated at the earliest possible time. Then we also have the integration with Sentinel. Sentinel is the SIEM solution that comes with Azure, whereby you can, once your logs are enabled, this serves as SIEM solution and at a cheaper cost compared to you having your SIEM solution. So it's a good one to consider. We IT auditors, we also need to think now in line with business justification and cost effectiveness. So why will I be using an on-prem SIEM solution for X amount when I can easily integrate my Sentinel SIEM with 50% cost saving, which probably Sentinel costs half of what I'm using on-prem? You need to evaluate all these things and make informed decision from the business and cost perspective. So I'll quickly run through screenshots of what we have and how it looks. This is a secure score recommendation. So this is the way we see it on Azure. You see it flagging, telling you the vulnerabilities, giving you the count of resources that this count is being detected on. You can drill down to see the precise resource and it gives you a secure score rating on them. And this also is the inventory. It gives you the list of resources you have and also tells you the vulnerability associated with each of the resources. From there, you can even know which of the resource is a key risk to you, looking at your risk assessment and vis-a-vis how this works. Then the next thing is your regulation and compliance. One I told you earlier. On this subscription, we have the PCI DSS, we have the ISO, and we have the SOC. So this gives us, it makes these standards easier to review. You can easily see how well you are complying and see where you are lacking, and then quickly go to where you are having issues and see where you can fix. And you can see this is how the network adaptive admin works. As you are hardening, it is reflecting and showing you how well you are doing. So, and you have the advisory also. It gives you things on cost optimization. You are running servers, you have the servers you spin up, and the way you are using it, the traffic going to that server is very low compared to the resources the server is having. It advises you how you can scale down and gives you the idea of the cost you'll be saving by scaling down. So all this as an auditor, it's a quick win. So last but not the least, we should also be careful, and this is where our knowledge needs to comes in. All these are advisories and vulnerabilities are being flagged by Security Center. We don't take it hook, line, and sinker. We have several false positives in them. They are only there to aid us as auditor, but your skills now needs to come in if it is flagging this, you need to reappraise it and review it in detail if it is false positive or not. And again, we have instances where we have compensating controls for all these things. Fine, might be telling me you don't have this thing in place, but as an organization, you have a compensative control somewhere that has addressed that concern. We need to be wary of that. And also on logging, Azure will always advise you, log this, log that. For every log you are logging, it has a cost impact. So as an auditor, you must be careful of just turning on every log, or you must be aware of at least the least logs that is required to keep critical information that you need for your audit engagement. And I think that's where we'll be stopping because of time frame. And I think we are able to, I believe we are able to cover some things, and it's a teaser. We can always develop more on this. There are several materials online, and some will also be shared on the platform where we can also read more on that. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Gani, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. I think it's so much to soak in, right? So aside all that he has shared, I think one place I love is the Azure Defender. And like he said, even if you are a rookie and do not understand some of the things shared above, it's a journey. We don't expect everybody to be on the same wavelength in terms of knowledge on this. So this, like he said, is a teaser. It prompts you to go and check up stuff on identity management, for instance. You can spend some time reading that. And we have a community both on WhatsApp and on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, please just drop it there, and we will, as much as possible, even support you in carrying out these reviews. Azure Defender is a summary of the health of your Azure infrastructure. It shows you all the exceptions or the issues. It also provides you with things like recommendation on what and how to go about remediation for those of us who may have interacted with that system. So I'll say it's my go-to place. I like to think again that other cloud providers besides Azure will have the same, because they are all in competition. But a note of warning, Gani, you also talked about the fact that you could have false positives. Let's not get carried away by the ease that the Azure Defender provides. There's a temptation that when you go there, you just start writing your report. This user doesn't have 2FA or MFA. This server has not. You just start downloading. The recommendations are based on Microsoft's advisory. You need to align your findings, recommendations with the policies of your organization or the business need of your organization. And those things supersede Microsoft's advice. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. We are particular about ensuring that we don't exceed the time for this. We respect your time so much, right? Okay, there's a question from Musa. He says, can you kindly explain service endpoints, public and private endpoints? Okay, that's one question. Endpoints. Okay. Gani, you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Okay. So it's when we talk about endpoints, there is really nothing like public or private endpoints. So what Microsoft does was that, when you subscribe to any Microsoft service, be it software as a service, hardware as a service, whatever, you have your VNets online or on the cloud where all your resources are kept. And that VNet is more like we having a private IP address. And we know private IP address is not trackable through the internet. So what Microsoft is now saying that instead of you, it's an added advantage. Instead of you going to pay for IP address over the public internet, pay for bandwidth and co, there are some resources that are available on Azure, that Azure probably database and co. So instead of you needing access to it, Azure can create a tunnel whereby from your own personal cloud, you can access those global things Azure have directly without going through the internet. So it's like extending your VNet to the Azure global resources without going through the internet. And you can see the core is you are going through the Azure backbone. So you're not going, one, you're not being exposed over the internet. And secondly, you're not even paying for any internet service provider. So it's just like an incentive for you to have cloud that, fine, I have, just like I have a branch head, I have two head office, one in location A, one in location B. And the head office in location A needs to have access to some things in location B. No, we are still on the same one. Before we can actually do that, you must have a VPN connectivity between these two locations. And for you to have that VPN connectivity, you have a VPN gateway, right? And have your internet service provider that creates an IPsec tunnel. So what Azure is now saying that once you are on cloud and you need to access some things on global Azure environment, you don't need to go through internet. You go through service endpoint. It creates a tunnel from your own service that you subscribe to down to what Microsoft have for you globally. And similar to that also, we have the express route, which is extending your LAN. So that is now saying it's in the same vein. You have your infrastructure as service on Azure cloud, and you have your LAN, and you want to link your organization, your resources together. You don't need to go through the cloud, through the internet. Just go through Azure Express Route. So both are actually speaking to private connectivity from LAN or your VNet to Azure resource. So that's just the basic concept. Hope I'm able to address that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Obiora is asking, is it possible to get network topology of an organization on Azure? Okay, I'll answer this way, right? Network topology of an organization is private to the organization. It just depends on how they're architected, just like we have for the on-prem. And so it's not likely that you will see any organization that will want to display theirs on the internet. But I like to think that we should have samples on the internet. We'll check and share. We'll check and share. Okay, so if you would like to, as we wrap up, if your organization is subscribed to Azure, you're an auditor on Monday, please just request for the global reader access on Azure. It's a read-only access, but it gives you access to all the subscriptions, and just start playing around. With a global reader, you cannot make modifications, but just start practicing, look through some of the things we've talked about, especially the Azure Defender. If you like to join our community on WhatsApp, maybe you want to drop your number and we'll add you. I've also dropped the link to join the community on LinkedIn on the group chat. That said, I want to thank all of us for your time here today. We try to do this monthly. We just pick topics, burning issues, and we have this session. This will be the first that we are having. So thank you very much for your time, and do have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you.